After leaving his job, Evan Baxter is summoned by God on a divine mission to build a huge ark to save people and animals from a flood that nobody believes in. Today, we're going to recap the story of the movie Evan Almighty from 2007. During a TV news broadcast, anchor Evan Baxter quits his job to become congressman for the city of Buffalo. In addition to his new public position, Evan, his wife Joan, and their children travel to their new home in Prestige City. After settling in, their son Ryan finds a stray dog and asks to keep it. However, his father doesn't like animals and quickly dismisses the idea. In response, the dog bites Evan a few times and even relieves himself in the middle of the lawn. Later that evening, Joan and Evan get ready for bed. She asks her husband if he has said his prayers. However, Evan doesn't show himself to be a man of faith and simply says that he'll take care of everything himself. Nevertheless, at his wife's request, Baxter decides to say a prayer. He gives thanks for his new life, and before going to sleep, he asks for help in fulfilling his biggest campaign promise, to change the world. The next morning, the alarm clock goes off at 6:14, which leaves Evan confused since he had set it for 7 o'clock. Despite this, he continues with his morning routine and prepares for his first day as a congressman. After saying goodbye to his family, Evan leaves home and finds a mysterious box outside. Inside are several old wooden tools which intrigues him, but he decides to return them to the sender after work. Minutes later, Baxter arrives at Congress where he meets his co-workers, Assistant Eugene, Secretary Rita, and Chief of Staff Marty. The aide tells him that his first job is to review a bill and, if everything is right, cast his vote of approval. As a result, Evan has to take work home, which prevents him from spending the day with his children. The next day, he once again wakes up to the clock striking 6:14. Another strange situation occurs when a truck drops off yet another package. This time, it's a huge load of wood. Not understanding what these deliveries are, he decides to call the sender's number. However, while making the call, he sees a sign on the television that reads Genesis 6 verse 14. The same number as the alarm on his clock. This strange coincidence makes him look in the Bible for the verse in the book of Genesis that talks about the construction of Noah's Ark. Evan then goes to the load of wood he has received and finds a mysterious man dressed in white standing next to it. The unknown man turns out to be none other than God, and he says he has a mission for Baxter, to build a huge ark. As you might expect, Evan thinks this is absurd. But God soon proves to know everything about his life, including secrets that no one else knows. Despite this, the congressman still doesn't believe and continues his routine to work. Minutes later, while driving to Congress, God suddenly appears in the passenger seat. Evan despairs and calls to a policeman who was on the street, only for him to take the form of God as well. Suddenly, several people appear with the face of the divine being, which only makes Baxter even more frightened. When he finally gets to Congress, the number 614 comes back to haunt him. He is informed that his secretary Rita's telephone extension is now 614, that the son of one of his colleagues was born at 6:14 a.m., and even the new license plate on his car has the code Gen 614. Even so, Evan tries to stay calm and goes to a meeting of the Natural Resources Committee. During the pledge to the flag, God once again appears next to Baxter, who can't take the surprise and collapses. Minutes later, the chairman of the committee, Representative Long, helps Evan wake up. He says he needs Evan's vote of support to move the bill forward. Evan agrees and is then seen by a doctor. However, the doctor turns out to be God, who appears to reinforce the importance of Evan's mission. When he sees him again, Evan faints for the second time. After that eventful day, Evan begins to take the idea of building the ark seriously. However, instead of embarking on this mission, he decides to take his wife and children for a walk so that he can cool off. Another day passes and Baxter heads off to work. Meanwhile, outside the house, various species of animals such as dogs, cats, pigeons, and even squirrels begin to gather in pairs around the lawn. Evan doesn't take it too seriously, but along the way, more animals in pairs begin to appear. When he arrives at Congress, he runs desperately to his room, but dozens of birds invade. Just then, Congressman Long arrives to talk to Evan along with other congressmen about the bill. However, everyone is surprised to see Baxter surrounded by birds, and he tries to explain himself. Miraculously, one of the congressmen accepts his explanation and agrees that they should talk about the new law soon. With this situation resolved, Evan rushes out of the room and drives his car away from the animals. However, the animals are insistent, and more of them appear on the road and even inside his car: sheep, raccoons, and even spiders and snakes. The situation only gets worse when he returns home and is surrounded by animals of all kinds. Not knowing what to do, he asks God for help. The Almighty soon appears and drives everyone away. God then takes Baxter back in time and shows him Prestige City when it was still a beautiful landscape. But now everything has been taken over by man and nature is almost gone. With no longer any doubt that the Lord is God himself, Evan asks why he was chosen and why he needs to create an ark. The Lord simply says that, like Evan, he also wants to change the world. To do so, a real act of charity and love will help them achieve this goal. Then God gives Evan a manual on how to create the ark and says that as soon as it is ready, the animals will enter it. Aware of his new mission, Baxter wakes up the next day and notices that his beard has suddenly grown. No matter how hard he tries to shave it, it grows back in a shape similar to that of the ancient apostles. Unable to do anything about it, Evan meets his family for coffee and they all notice the change in his appearance. But he just shrugs it off. However, while he was eating, the doorbell rang and the woman who had sold them their house appeared, all happy because, according to her, Evan had bought 8 plots of land near there. He soon deduces that this was God's doing, as well as the various trucks that appear on the land, leaving more and more logs. When she finds out, Joan is confused by her husband's attitude. But he just tells her that, for a reason he can't explain, he needs to build a huge boat. Even though she doesn't understand what's going on, she decides to support him. And so, Evan calls his children to start building the ark. Unfortunately, because he has never worked hard before, Evan has a lot of trouble with this task and hurts himself every time he tries to do something. He doesn't know how to use the tools, trips over the logs, and even hammers his own finger more than once. At the end of the day, while his wife tends to his wounds, Evan receives a call from Congress asking him to return to work. He returns the next morning, and as he feared, his hair and beard are even longer. Baxter tries to disguise his strange appearance from his colleagues. But then Congressman Long appears and asks him to write a letter in support of the bill. However, seeing Evan's sloppy appearance, Long asks him to sort out whatever is going on as they need this approval, which will be voted on in Congress in 2 weeks' time. Having temporarily gotten rid of this problem, Evan returns home and continues building the ark. During the work, he and his children realize that it will take more strength to lift the huge wooden beams. Then God sends a huge wooden crane powered by a large wheel. Thanks to this, the family manages to put the beams in their proper places and the ark gradually takes shape. When evening comes, Evan takes a bath and receives another gift from God, a robe from the time of the great priests. He puts it on and, as you might expect, his whole family finds it very strange. During dinner, God appears on the newspaper weather forecast and announces that the Great Flood will occur on September 22nd at noon. Evan is startled by the news as the date is getting closer and closer. Noticing her husband's concern, Joan sends the children to their rooms and calls Evan in for a serious talk. She demands explanations, and then Baxter reveals that he has been chosen by God to build a huge ark, just as Noah did, before a flood destroys everything and everyone. His wife doesn't believe the story and says that both she and their children need Evan to return to normal. He understands Joan's anguish but knows he has to complete his mission. Another day passes and Baxter tries to bring a minimum of normality to his life. Since he can't cut his beard and hair, he instead gives himself a stylish haircut to get back to work at Congress. He also takes off his tunic and puts on his usual jacket and tie. However, when he leaves the house to receive a package, he realizes that he is completely without clothes. Evan understands that God is forcing him to wear the tunic anyway. However, to counter this provocation, he puts on his jacket and tie over his tunic and goes to Congress to vote on the bill. The event begins and is being broadcast on TV. A few minutes later, Evan arrives in the voting room and is asked by Congressman Long to stand up and show his support for the new law. However, when the congressman gets up, his clothes are removed and he is once again in a tunic while his hair and beard grow even longer. Seeing this, Long thinks it was a magic trick by Baxter and reprimands him. But before Evan can explain, several animals invade the room. With no other choice, Evan reveals that the animals are there to save themselves from the flood, which will happen on September 22nd. The congressman asks him where he heard this information, and Evan simply replies that God told him. This answer leaves everyone incredulous, and Congressman Long orders Evan to be removed from the room. Desperate, He tries to warn everyone of the disaster to come, but everyone believes he's gone mad. After all the confusion, Evan returns home, but things go from bad to worse. Joan decides to take her children to her mother's house while her husband finishes his sacred mission. Evan tries his best to convince her that his words are true and of his fear of the great flood. Just then, drops begin to fall on the other side of the window, and Evan believes that this is an omen of disaster, only to discover that it was just the hose from the sprinkler. Seeing that her husband has lost his sanity, Joan says goodbye and drives away. Now alone and with everyone believing he's crazy, Evan has nothing left to lose and continues his mission to finish the Great Ark. His great effort to finish the boat becomes news and begins to spread around the world, as well as attracting curious onlookers to his home. Later, Joan and her children are having lunch in a restaurant when the news about Evan causes two men to make fun of him. Her children don't like this at all and go to the bathroom, while Joan calls one of the waiters and asks for another meal. Then one of them appears to serve her, and he is God disguised as a waiter. He asks Joan if she is feeling well, and she tells him about her husband, who has become the Noah of New York. Aware of everything that is happening, God convinces her to go back to her husband because the story of Noah, contrary to what many people think, was not God's revenge but an opportunity for humanity to improve. Just as in the past, the animals have united with their pairs. Just as Noah's family stood by him until the end, this opportunity is about to repeat itself again, and it's up to Joan and her children to stand with Evan on his great mission. After this beautiful sermon, God bids Joan farewell and magically creates the plate of food she had asked for. After the meal, she takes her children back home and finds the ark getting closer and closer to being ready. The four search for Evan, who turns up with even grayer hair and beard. Overcome with emotion, he asks why his family has come back, and they tell him that they will stand by him no matter what. This makes Evan even more motivated. But Joan also warns him that there is another problem to be solved. Congressman Long has ordered that the ark be dismantled by September 22nd. Otherwise, they will destroy it and Evan will be arrested. Evan knows that this is the date that the flood will occur, and if the ark is destroyed before that, there will be no hope for the animals, his family, and the residents of Prestige City to survive the disaster. Everything seems to be heading for a tragic end until hundreds of animals gather in front of them to help Evan and his family finish the ark. Monkeys, elephants, and birds of all kinds continue with the construction, while lions keep the invaders at bay. While everyone is working on it, Marty, Eugene, and Rita go to Evan's house to warn him about Congressman Long's plans. After an investigation, they discover that the bill is part of a plan for him to take over the nature reserves and profit from them. This strategy was also used by him in the past to create the huge Prestige City Dam on other people's land. However, in order to cut costs and increase profits, he reduced expenses, which made the dam unsafe, and the residents didn't receive their share of the negotiations. So, to prevent the bill from being passed, Evan must return to Congress and vote against it. However, he is suspended from his duties as a congressman and needs to finish the ark before the fateful day. Seconds later, his son appears and says that the ark is finally ready. Evan then summons all the animals to enter, and they obey him, which leaves everyone around impressed. Finally, September 22nd arrives, and Evan urges everyone around him to get into the ark as soon as possible because the flood is about to begin. However, the day is very sunny, and no one believes that such a disaster is going to happen. To make matters worse, Congressman Long arrives on the scene along with cranes and trucks to destroy the huge ark. Before giving the order, he goes to meet Evan, who reveals that he knows about his real plans with this bill. He then asks the congressman to repent for his sins and put an end to these petty plans. However, Long is undeterred and orders the police to arrest Evan and destroy the ark. The policemen obey the order, and after lifting a huge iron weight with the crane, they warn that in 3 minutes everything will be destroyed. Joan runs to her husband and tries to persuade him to leave. He reluctantly agrees, and the whole family gets ready to leave. However, the animals begin to huddle together as if they don't want to leave the ark because something bad is about to happen. Just as Evan had feared, gigantic dark clouds appear from the sky, heralding heavy rain. However, it doesn't last long, and the day becomes sunny again. This leaves Evan even more confused about God's real plans. But he soon remembers the dam that Congressman Long built. Looking at the horizon, he sees the great structure about to collapse and tells everyone to get into the ark. But no one believes his words. As Evan had feared, the dam's retaining walls cannot withstand the force of the water, and so a gigantic wave travels forcefully towards the town. Seeing this, the residents rush to get into the ark, their only hope of salvation. With everyone inside, Evan and his son close the large gate and climb up to the outside of the ark. In front of them, the great mass of water breaks through the trees and reaches the boat, which has its foundations destroyed but fortunately manages to float on the water. With the force of the waves, all the houses, including Evan's, are destroyed. The entire town of Prestige City is submerged, but its residents hold on to the ark as long as they can to stay alive. Just ahead, however, a huge waterfall appears in the path. Evan asks everyone to hold on tight to protect themselves from the impact, and fortunately, the ark holds firm. The disaster, however, has only just begun, and the ark is carried towards a huge stone bridge. Evan climbs to the top of the ark and tries to use his powers to divert it, but nothing happens. He then asks for divine intervention, which soon comes when a gigantic wave forms on the right side of the ark. Thanks to this, it is taken to the other side towards Congress. Meanwhile, Congressman Long is once again coordinating the vote to approve his bill. At that moment, all the congressmen seem to stand up as an act of approval, but in fact, they see the ark getting closer and closer. Everyone runs for their lives, including Congressman Long, as the big boat is about to crash into Congress. Miraculously, the ark stops midway and everyone is safe. After surviving this disaster, Evan and the others confront the congressman because his irresponsible act in building the dam has destroyed an entire town. Because of this, his bill is canceled, his actions are investigated, and finally, a llama spits right in the man's face. With everything settled, the animals on the ark set off in search of a new home. As for Evan, once his mission has been accomplished, he returns to his normal appearance, regains his position as congressman, and decides to enjoy a happy weekend with his family. While they are preparing for a picnic, God appears in a tree up ahead. Evan goes to talk to him and soon understands that the flood was not created by the Lord but by human mistakes, like the one Congressman Long made because of his greed. In fact, God orchestrated it all so that Evan could save his family and the townspeople. Finally, God and Evan celebrate this great feat with a dance. Afterwards, the Lord says goodbye while Evan returns to his family. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.